Intelligence High School Debate.
Hello and welcome to Intelligence High School Debate, the 2017 Asian Cup. I'm your host, Seo Mi-sorang. Albert Einstein once said, "When we all think alike, no one thinks very much." The ability to think outside the box and think differently is the basis of innovation, and we encourage all students participating today to think outside the box as they prepare their case. This week on Intelligence, students from Singapore, China, Japan, and Korea compete against each other in the very final episode of Intelligence. But before we begin, let's first check out the rules of the British Parliamentary debate.
This tournament adapts the British parliamentary style. The debate consists of 4 teams of 2 speakers with 2 teams on either side of the case. Each speaker should deliver a 5-minute speech, and teams gain points individually even if on the same side. The first and last minute of each speech is protected from the point of information.
Time now to meet our students. Teams and sides are chosen by drawing lots, so each team please randomly select a scroll. It will have your team position written on it. First up are the students from Korea, Han Ye-ju and Park Jin-ha. Their scroll reads, Closing Government. Next up are the students from China, Jiang Tenshen and Ping Sang-ro. They've selected Opening Opposition. Continuing on from Singapore, Christina Thomas and Yap Sin Ran. Opening Government. And next, students from Japan, Sota Mitsuhashi and Yuriko Nishikawa. Position, Closing Opposition.
National fantastic national pride and asset. Our policy sitting.
Behind also the election of Donald Trump. There is a
humanitarian path really like give up and sacrifice their own national benefits to like get
Okay, those were your 8 students. Time now to meet our 3 adjudicators. First, Professor Joshua Park, member of the Executive Committee of the World Schools Debating Championships. Next, Michael Dunn-Gokshin from England, former #1 ranked debater of the World Universities Debating Championship. And we're also joined by Professor Tepor Sinamgan from Thailand, convener of the World Universities Debating Championship. And last but not least, we're also joined by 50 audience judges right here in the studio. They'll be giving continuous feedback throughout the debate in the form of green lights. When they agree with what the speaker is saying, they will turn their lights on. Okay, enough from me. Let's check out the motion for the 2017 Asian Cup.
The United Kingdom left the European Union, and the US declared an American-first foreign policy, and many European countries are becoming increasingly hostile to refugees in order to protect their countries. The battle between globalists and nationalists has become the central axis of conflict within and across many nations around the world. Nationalism versus cosmopolitanism. What should schools teach their students in this era of globalization? This house believes that schools should teach their students to be global citizens instead of instilling nationalism. The students are given only 30 minutes to prepare for their speeches, and that fierce debate is about to begin.
It's hard to deny that the world is becoming a global village. So how should schools teach their students in order to foster global citizenship while also at the same time remaining true to their roots and national identity? Let's ask the future leaders of the world, all right? The Prime Minister, please.
We want the world to come together and not apart.
We think the issue of nationalism is incredibly important, especially in today's context with the recent Brexit and Donald Trump presidency. Nationalism and all its problems that come with it make us very proud to stand on the side of global citizenship. So before we move on to our main case, let's define a couple of key terms. Firstly, by global citizenship, we're talking about the idea of one's identity transcending geography or your political boundaries. We think that the responsibilities and rights of one are in fact derived from this broader idea that you are all humans and we are all a part of humanity. So what exactly does it mean by nationalism? It simply means that above all else, you identify yourself as a citizen of a certain country. But let's make something very clear. In order to be a nationalist, it doesn't mean that you don't have national pride. That is to say that on our side of the house, we can still feel proud to be Singaporeans and also still be a global citizen. Nationalism is exclusive in that if we were to be nationalism, we would feel proud to only be Singaporeans. So it's not fair for opposition to tell us today that we can't have national pride on our side of the house. So let's move on to our policy for today then. We think that schools should focus more on teaching to be a global citizen rather than to be nationalism. The motion itself already assumes that nationalism is being taught in schools, rather we're just going to use that existing infrastructure to instead teach that we should just all be considered humans as opposed to be considered a citizen of a country. So let's move on to our setup then. Why exactly is this idea of a globalized world so rampant? We've given you 3 examples. Firstly, on the idea of modern information, the idea that knowledge is very, very easily accessible and far more than before when you were just confined into your own geographical country. Second of all, we give you the idea of communications. We think that with social media being prevalent, when Donald Trump tweets, everybody knows about it. Lastly, we want to talk to you about transport, with how easy it is for a bunch of different countries to come and meet together at the same place. We think this means that globalization is an inevitable force, and the only way to deal with that is to become a global citizen. Second of all, why exactly is education important in this debate then? We think it's because it actually allows the next generation to continue to develop. And in fact, the next generation, us as youth, means that we can influence social change in becoming civil servants or even just voting for the next politician that we want. So moving on to our case for today, we have a couple of points. First of all, I'll be talking to you about solving world problems, and second of all, I'll be talking to you about xenophobia. So moving on to my first point then, this idea about solving world problems. We think that a lot of the problems that currently plague society are no longer confined to national boundaries. For example, pollution, for example, terrorism. So we have 2 effects of this. We think being taught to be a global citizen above all else has 2 effects. In that firstly, as an individual, I no longer have the not in my backyard mentality. That is to mean that even if I'm not affected directly by this, I also see perhaps that as a Singaporean, I see that terrorism affects the Middle East, and I will feel that this is also my responsibility, and I'll be a lot less inward looking towards world issues and world problems. Second of all, it means that as an individual, I'm a lot more responsible in that I try and solve these issues. So for example, I will donate to organizations to try and stop pollution, or even donate to organizations that perhaps try and resolve the refugee crisis. Second impact of this is a political capital you have as an individual. So first of all, as an individual, I'm able to vote. And it means that once I start caring for everyone else because we are all humans, as opposed to differentiating based on citizenship, it means that I'm going to start voting for politicians that are a lot more internationalist, meaning that my politicians will not involve themselves a lot more on the global stage, on an international stage, and that my country will be a lot better and a lot more helpful in solving these sort of world issues. So we think the logic of this substantive applies to a whole slew of world issues. For example, we give you the humanitarian crisis that have been happening. Without this idea of global citizenship, no one else would have donated to help Japan with this Fukushima crisis. Second of all, we give you the idea of climate change, in that a lot of countries will pull out of the Paris Peace Agreement, just like Trump, because they'll feel that climate change is someone else's problem. Last of all, we give you the example of terrorism. For example, just because there's no bombings in Singapore, it doesn't mean that terrorism is not something that affects me. On to my second point, the idea of xenophobia then. We think nationalism only allows you to see yourself as a citizen, which means that I'm going to start ostracizing other people who are not citizens. That means that, for example, if I'm Singaporean and I see someone who is perhaps a permanent resident or an immigrant in my country, I'm going to start othering them and I'm going to start ostracizing them simply because I was taught that above all else, I must be Singaporean above being a humanitarian. We think we've seen this already, and for example, in America with the whole sentiment that Mexicans are not part of America and that illegal immigrants are immigrants on a whole are a very, very big problem in America. We think this is something that's very, very bad because it allows xenophobia to continue, and it allows for people to continue to be very, very mean and harmful towards people that they don't necessarily consider citizens. We think this is a very big problem in today's society, and for all these reasons, because we solve world issues and also because we prevent xenophobia, I'm incredibly proud to propose.
Okay, that was the Prime Minister arguing for the motion, so arguing that schools should teach students to be global citizens instead of instilling nationalism. Let's see how persuasive her speech was. 40 out of 50, so 80% of the audience were in agreement with the Prime Minister. Well done. We now move on to the Leader of Opposition.
Okay, so first I have 3 rebuttals to deliver. First, on the notion of global citizen. Firstly, our opponents define it as a kind of a cosmopolitan point of view towards humanity, but we regard it as a kind of duty on a particular individual to owe the political allegiance to whom. In this case, we owe the political allegiance to our country, to our own nation, to our Chinese government and to our Singaporean government, not to a broad, vague concept of humanity. Because we don't know what humanity is, we can clearly define what a nation is, and we can trace it back to our history and to our culture, to our common language. And secondly, on their arguments, on their materialistic conception of globalization, of global citizen, they're not. It's not an inevitable force because look at the forces behind the global citizen. They're behind Brexit, behind the election of Donald Trump. They're the forces of poverty. They're forces of social injustice. They're forces of international trade. And we believe that those are the forces that are driving the promotion of the notion of a global citizen. And thirdly, let's look at the so-called virtues of global citizenship. Yes.
So on your side of the house, because you believe in a nationalistic agenda, Justin Trudeau, Angela Merkel, they wouldn't accept any refugees into their home country.
I'm not denying refugees, and I'm not treating refugees as something that we should throw between different nations, and no one will accept. But we do provide a solution with the refugee crisis. But we should also allow the freedom of each nation. That means whether to take refugees is a freedom up to each nation, not a duty forced upon each nation. Because a freedom to take refugees, a freedom of self-determination. That means Korea, as a nation, doesn't want to take refugees. Then the United Nations or America should not force Korean to take millions of refugees. Because it's up to your Korean people to decide whether to take refugees. And if you force the Korean nation to take refugees, that is tantamount, that is similar to enslavement of Korean people, and that is very immoral. So come to our constructive case. And today I'm going to prove to you why teaching nationalism is an essential step in turning young people into moral beings, into mature citizens. Why? Because schools, in essence, is responsible for the maturing of morality and psyche and the character of the young people. And so make an analogy, right? Mathematics is essential for the study of science, and nationalism, in a similar way, is essential for you to become a moral being. Why is that? So Hegel has a famous argument that what is real is rational, right? So let's look at what is real in nationalism. Nationalism has 3 chief virtues. Firstly, nationalism is an antidote to self-interest. So everyone is a self-interested being. If not regulated by law, we can take whatever from others and we can steal things without being punished. And only if there is a law in place and there is a moral law in place that regulate our behavior, we can behave morally, and in such a way our society can change for the better. Nationalism is such an idea that unite people together under a same government, and we agree on the decisions made by the government. And in that way, the kind of behavior is regulated instead of being unregulated. That means the society becomes orderly and lawful, and that provides a safe environment in which culture and in which economy can flourish. And secondly, it's a morality aspect of nationalism, because a nation is the ultimate construction of humanity. That means we study our Chinese culture, the culture of dragons, the culture of Chinese language, and we can understand each other better than others. That means that cannot be achieved by trying to force different people to study same language as English. So the third argument will be presented by my partner. Thank you very much.
Okay, that was the leader of opposition arguing against the motion. Let's count the number of green lights. 13 out of 50. Okay, we move back to the government bench. The Deputy Prime Minister, please step forward to the podium.
We see that the problem that opening opposition has identified is this idea of a freedom to make decisions. But that is not the debate we're having today. The debate today is about whether or not we should educate kids about having an outward-looking mindset. It is not about telling us that our policy will necessarily be international or domestic-looking. And this is especially important in the context of today's climate, where we have American kids, for instance, looking and reading at Trump's tweets, where literally he says, buy American, sell American, hire American. That is the kind of pervasive context that we have. Likewise, for Brexit, where you have a lot of nationalistic ideas and populism already being so pervasive and rampant. And it's to countervail against this popular narrative that we think that it's important for schools to start educating kids about having a different mindset, about having something that's a lot broader in its agenda, something that's a lot more international. So let's just deal with some of the constructive material that came out from Elo. He told us about how nationalism is inherently self-interested. Yes, we'll be dealing with that later in my substantive. But more importantly, he told us about this idea of unification. But before I move on, yes.
Why government can control citizens' thought or idea by using education?
Sorry, governments can control citizens' thoughts and ideas, which is why we would like the government to influence their thoughts and ideas to be slightly more broader, slightly more internationalistic. And we've already talked about how there is a difference between nationalism and national pride. We're perfectly fine with each individual having some amount of national pride, but we don't think that that individual needs to have a nationalistic ideology, because nationalism as an ideology is inherently exclusive. That is to mean that if you are a nationalist, you are unlikely to see yourself as thereafter being a global citizen. Versus on our side, where if you are a global citizen, you can be a global citizen and then a Singaporean. Nationalism as an ideology is exclusive, again, not responded to. But the main case that came out from opening opposition was this idea of unification. And I'll be talking to you about why unification does not happen. The reason when you start educating young, malleable minds that the only reason they should feel any affinity for someone else is because they share a similar identity, you're only going to encourage a slippery slope. Why is this the case? Because individuals are going to start looking for common traits that associate themselves with someone else. So for instance, in a Singaporean classroom, if you teach Singaporeans to be nationalistic, at first, yes, they might feel some sort of national pride and they might feel like they need to privilege themselves over, let's say, Malaysians and Indonesians, but very quickly, these individuals will start recognizing that Singaporean, as a majority Chinese society, would, for instance, start to look for those traits instead, such as skin color. So for instance, if I'm in a Singaporean classroom and I'm, well, not fair-skinned, my Chinese classmates will start to see, oh, my similarities are probably a lot more closely tied with that of another Chinese individual compared to me as someone who's brown-skinned. And that's the problem with nationalism, is that it breeds this kind of discontentment where within multicultural societies, you're more likely to get that kind of tension and that kind of divide. That's not something that we stand for on our side. The comparative, therefore, is when individuals start seeing themselves as human, independent of their race, independent of their religion, where it does not matter your skin color. What really matters is that you are part of this broader idea of humanity. That's something we're very proud to stand for. Again, analysis that my first speaker already told you, ideas of solving world issues, refugee crisis, environmental conservation, tragedy of the commons, climate change, all panel, audience member, not responded to. Now I'll be moving on to my argument about economic nationalism, because the issue in this debate, when we're talking about nationalism as a political ideology, also encompasses nationalism as an economic means through which countries can govern themselves. And we see that it's incredibly problematic when countries start to adopt an economically nationalistic mindset wherein they want to privilege things like protectionism. Because we recognize that in today's society, almost everything functions on a global supply chain. So the minute you have policies like Trump telling you that you only want to buy American and sell American, you're just going to cost iPhone $4.2 billion more in order to manufacture back home in the US compared to manufacturing in China. But this is exactly the kind of mindset you have at a point where you tell everyone that you only want to hire American workers to build your iPhone rather than just building it in China, even though in China it could be a lot cheaper. That's the kind of harms that economic nationalism can have because of things like the global supply chain. That is why countries are still going to go ahead with the TPP, even though the US is no longer a part of it, because they recognize that having such an inward-looking mindset is only going to hurt their own country's ability to access cheaper goods, for instance, or to be able to travel between different countries. These are all the kinds of harms that will necessarily come about when you have opening opposition and opposition benches model in general of having a nationalistic, inward-looking mindset. So what have we proven to you here at Opening Government? We've talked to you about solving world issues, in which we told you that because each individual and each country is going to be self-interested under a nationalistic model, which by the way is a main premise that they talked about in their first principle of nationalism, you're unlikely to get real, pertinent world issues being solved. Everything from the refugee crisis to environmental conservation to climate change. These are real issues that are going to affect everyone at some point. Just because it's not affecting you in the short to medium term, it is still something that is of global concern. Again, not responded to. We also talked to you about xenophobia, where you as an individual might not see another nationality as someone who you want to respect and be kind to, but more importantly, how it can also breed tensions within your own geographical boundaries, within a country, especially that country is multicultural. We also talked to you about economic nationalism. We look forward to the other members of the House responding. I'm incredibly proud to propose.
Okay, that was the Deputy Prime Minister arguing for the motion. So how persuasive was she? Let's count the number of green lights. 38 out of 50, putting the total for the opening government at 78 out of 100. Okay, back to the opposition bench, the Deputy Leader of Opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, they talked about, well, people will have no care about international issues, but we think that international issues is also national issues, because people in China are also concerned with terrorists. Someday may attack China someday, and they also, some kind of humanistic sentiments is intrinsic to human beings, which means that they will care for terrorists anyway. But second, they talk about refugees. We think that people are self-interested. That's why even if they talk about a lot about human rights, they're still gonna think that, well, refugees gonna take my job. We think in order to address that problem, you need economic development. You need to teach them about economic issues, about how refugees will take more jobs to them, and that's how we address this kind of problem. But thirdly, we also told you that nationalism can be liberal, right? We think that TPP, America, have the incentive to sign it. It's because of its national interest, because it can communicate with other countries more and also trade more, so that the American economy can be improved. So that's how nationalism is also interconnected with international issues. But moreover, we think that we also have the defined power for national issues. For example, American nationalism can be Trump's American first, but sorry, most of Americans don't really buy that idea. They believe that American nationalism is also an idea of democracy, also an idea of inclusiveness. So come to our first substantive about communitarianism. First, we think that the communitarianism and self-mutual help can only be achieved in our side, because in their side, they don't really have the intrinsic value about how to be proud of their nations. For example, France believe that French is the most beautiful language in the world, and China believe that their history is very something that they need to be proud of. And Korea, of course, also proud of their history. And when you stop teaching those kind of ideas, you actually break down all those kind of special traditions, special identity, and special language. That's how we see in international growth in China, people become Americanized. They lose that kind of cultural bond. Why is that extremely harmful? Because firstly, people simply stop contributing to society because they believe that, well, simply I'm only a one job in the whole society. I'm only a one job in the ocean. Why do I need to help for so many people? For example, we all know that a lot of refugees are suffering, but we don't necessarily contribute to them. Why does nationalism change that? Because we provide people with a strong emotional force that bond people together. When they see their neighborhoods, they're more likely to contribute to them, and they think that this is obligation for them. But second, we think that in a civic society, we also construct that kind of morality that is not necessarily law-binding. We think law is only prescribes some of the most obvious conducts. Moreover, we think that in civic society, because of the kind of morality, people are more likely to work for the society more efficiently and construct a more productive society despite the law only regulate for a minimal society. That's how we see nationalism is even more helpful for developing countries like China, where people work very, very hard in order to construct their country well. But second, about the diversity. First layer of analysis is about how the interaction will happen on the different kind of nationalistic sentiments. Because we think that people are necessarily curious about other countries. When people go out and when they receive the nationalism education, they tag themselves as being Chinese, as being Japanese. We think this kind of curiousness, this kind of difference also bring interaction with one another. But second, we believe that it also gives people a defined power to define their own identity. For example, people can say, oh, I'm not so American. I'm a little bit like liberal American, for example, and I'm not so necessarily traditional Chinese, but what kind of Chinese I am? So this kind of defining power and intersection can only happen unique to our side. But second, we think that nationalism and this kind of distinctive culture also bring depth to people. For example, we bring, in English, we bring freedom from German, we bring liberty from Latin, and only kind of this cultural precipitation can happen with sophisticated, unique culture, can bring this kind of intersection and frame distinctive philosophical idea. And this, why is that important? Because it leads humans to go through crisis, because we have different ways of thinking. And we don't want some kind of cultural hegemony with somebody say, well, dictatorship is good because it brings efficiency, or democracy is necessarily better. We believe that only kind of debate happening in our side when Francis Fukuyama can analyze different kind of nation building and to find what is the best balance between us. And based on this, I'm very proud to propose.
Okay, that was the Deputy Leader of Opposition arguing against the motion. Let's count the number of green lights. 25 out of 50, putting the total for the opening opposition at 38 out of 100. Okay, that was the top half of today's debate. Before we continue, I would like to ask our three adjudicators. Michael Dunn-Gokshin.
So I'm going to make comments on the opening government. So the first thing I'd like to say is I think you really sell us on the vision. But the bad bits, God forbid, no, those are something the other side needs to deal with. And I think that's one way of doing it, but potentially something that's also a bit more argumentative as opposed to definitional would be a helpful way to buttress that and strengthen your case.
So I'll be commenting on the opening opposition. I do feel that you could do better in terms of maybe elaborating and providing more details to some of your arguments, and especially if you're being compared to an opening government that has a lot of examples to illustrate their ideas. It does feel a little bit more assertive. I think you do explain a bit, but I think you could have done a bit more in terms of both elaboration theoretically and examples to make those explanations more believable. But overall, quite good.
On the overall of the opening half, I think very importantly, both teams had to be more comparative. We see opening up focus on self-benefit, self-realization of individuals, which are very much important as well. Towards opening government, focus on a more greater value towards saving the world and fixing problems. Both were great. Both were needed. The question then is that both teams need to explain their process or their step to integrate, right?
Thank you for your feedback. We now continue on with the closing half of today's debate, and for that, I call upon the Member of Government.
We think this debate should be much more sophisticated than whether globalization is something that's good for the world and how citizens are going to react if everyone is a global citizen. Rather, we think that the focus of this debate should be education and why education should be able to play a very exclusive role in the process of globalization. So I'm going to give you 3 extensions on closing government, rebuttals integrated. I'm first going to talk about the exclusivity of education and why it's particularly beneficial to educate a global citizenry, especially light of an educational environment. Secondly, I'm going to talk about the benefits of this education on individuals, how it's going to change individual experience. And thirdly, I'm going to talk about solving like global problems, an extension to what our opening government said. So firstly, let's talk about education. We think we have to note the political context of the modern world right now. We think that the boundary of nations that go on right now, in especially post-conflict regions or countries that have had delineated relationships for a long time, are oftentimes artificial divides and historical divides, whether it be within the country or with other nations. We think especially in that case, it's very difficult for any kind of media narrative or any kind of parents or whether any other kind of information to influence you as an individual and say that globalization is the way to go. Because oftentimes media doesn't have the incentive to do that. Oftentimes nations and politicians don't have the incentive to do that. What we do on our side is we provide a counter narrative and say that this is another way that you can look at the world. We are not going to say that this is the best way to look at the world, but we think this counter narrative is especially a role that education should be able to play, because education is something that should be able to counter what society says and says that this is a different perspective, a different way, a different frame of looking at the world. Secondly, we think that the educational environment is an environment in which individuals oftentimes for the first time in their life learn things like discussion, learn things like discourse. We think especially in light of that environment, it's beneficial for individuals to acknowledge that they are global citizens and the different backgrounds that different individuals and different backgrounds are something that matters. Finally, we also think that education isn't simply about society or what benefits society, it's also about what benefits individuals. It should be something that tells an individual that this should be enough for you to survive in this world. So second extension, why does it help individuals? First of all, we think we want to talk about individuals who are adjusting to global society. That is, these are the people who are going to meet different kinds of people, meet people from all over the world. We think it decreases the chances that these individuals are going to attack another person on the basis of things like xenophobia, on the basis of things like ad hominem attacks. We think that betters the discourse at the point in which these individuals can engage in the global society. Secondly, we want to talk about individuals living in diverse societies. We think that we create the concept, we think nationalism creates the concept that you are either a patriot or a traitor. We think we liberalize individuals from that very concept, and this is going to be able to help especially minorities living in diverse societies. But thirdly, even if you were not engaged internationally at all, we think nationalism oftentimes hinders you from making what is the best choice for you. Because oftentimes politicians are going to use the rhetoric, this is best for America, so you'd better choose this. We think we free individuals, and individuals can now make the best choice for themselves. We think this is an individual benefit that opening half of the debate failed to engage with. But fourthly, we think that it increases the likelihood that you are going to be protected, not simply because you are similar with another person, but because you are a member of the international society. We think these are all the ways in which this kind of education benefits individuals who live this particular experience. We don't think it's enough in this debate to simply assert globalization is good. We think globalization is good, but we think that in light of education and in light of how individuals live in that global society, it's especially beneficial that we have this model. But third extension, how do we solve global problems? Because opening government tried to talk about global problems like terrorism, like environmental problems, without necessarily telling us why this is going to be specifically different under our scenario. First of all, we're going to say that it's going to be much more easier for nations to sell their ideas, sell their international policies, sell humanitarian policies to their citizenry. Why is that the case? Because oftentimes these policies are things that require sacrifices on that nation's behalf. Now it becomes much more easier for people to sell their ideas. But secondly, we think that oftentimes what happens in the status quo is that nations fail to develop themselves. And we think that in order to solve global problems, it's not simply a matter of cooperation. You also need national development and more political clout as a nation in order to make sure that you can come together to solve problems. You need development in things like technology, in things like military. You need these kinds of development. But oftentimes, what happens within a nation is that they reject certain kinds of development simply by branding them as either Western or Eastern. That is, you're going to reject what the other country is doing right now simply by virtue of the fact that they come from a different country. We think we liberalize countries to make sure that they are capable of adopting all kinds of possible solutions on the plate. So at the end of the day, not only do we fulfill the purpose of education on closing government, we are the only team in this debate to analyze what education means and how it should change individuals and society. Very proud to propose.
Okay, that was a member of government arguing for the motion, according to the speaker. So how persuasive was her speech? 35 out of 50. Okay, we move on to the member of opposition. Please step forward to the podium.
what is education? So school should provide lots of aspects of the education. Education should put priorities to spread students' view the lane. So if the governments want to promote globalization, education is not the best way. For example, politicians should promote such kind of policy and so on. So education is not best way to spread the globalization. So that's why we should not take this motion. So what is a school? So school, of course, they provide education to each student, but it has a very big effects on each student because students tend to affect very easily because students are just children, especially elementary school children or junior high school students. If they teach that globalization is very important, sorry, no, thank you. Globalization is the most important thing. Even they do not think that themselves, they think that globalization is the most important thing about that. Why? We can say such kind of situation is a great. Of course, nationalism, globalization, we do not deny that. We do not deny that globalization is not necessary, nationalism is not necessary. We just say the well-balanced between globalization and nationalism is the most important thing about that. So education should provide the lots of aspects. So that's why we should not take this motion. So first of all, I'd like to talk about why nationalism is needed. So of course, nationalism is important thing about that in order to protect own country's benefits. So that if we do not think about nationalism, if we do not think about that Arab countries at all, we cannot protect own country's benefits. So that's why, of course, the government should provide schools should teach that nationalism is also important about that. And our present question is the best because we can know. We learned about our own history, and I'm Japanese, so we learned Japanese, and Korean students are learned. Sorry, no, thank you. Korean languages. So each country's students learn their each mother languages. So that's why we can. That's why in another present questions we learn about the nationalism as well. And secondly, I'd like to talk about globalization's necessity. Of course, globalization is also important about that. And now, another status quo, we can learn also the globalization things. For example, I am Japanese, but I learned about the world history, so we know that what kind of world exists or what kind of a culture other country has. And I learned the English as a second languages, and I think that other countries' members also learn the other countries' languages as a second languages. So now, another status quo. Another status quo. Students can learn about globalization as well as nationalism.
Madam.
Sorry, no, thank you. So if we keep these questions, students can learn about globalization and nationalism with their very well balanced. But if we carry out this motion, this kind of nationalism, the education will disappear, or this kind of nationalism education will lack. What happened?
Information, madam.
Sorry, no, thank you. What happened? We can easily imagine that we know about only globalization things, or people tend to think about the globalization. So education should be equal, and education should provide lots of aspect equality. So that's why if we promote the globalization, education is not the best way. Education should provide both of good points. So that's why this motion is not suitable way to. This motion is not suitable way. So that's why we should not take this motion. Thank you.
Okay, that was a member of opposition arguing against the motion. Let's see how many audience members agreed with the speaker. 20 out of 50. Okay, we now move on to the last speaker from the government bench, the government whip.
Ladies and gentlemen, we mentioned from the member of government that this debate is not about like arguing that politicians should like accept 300 refugees, like despite all the national kind of like harms that it does. We're not talking about, and we're not supporting that every country should like follow that humanitarian path where they like give up and sacrifice their own national benefits to like, you know, get all the humanitarian things done, right? We're not saying that. Rather, we kept on telling you from the first speaker of the closing government that we keep on telling you that globalization, like basically educating these people to be cosmopolitans, leads to, first of all, their own national benefits that you guys really, really like. But secondly, ladies and gentlemen, we told you that counter-narrative and providing diverse perspective is such a big thing that is important that we have to safeguard in this debate and in this society, right? So we're going to give you like three clashes, for example, basically. First of all, we're going to talk about what is better education, who provides better education. Secondly, who provides better education, not for individuals, but for society. And lastly, we're going to move on to what is nationalism, like what is nationalist like education. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, the first like bench opening team from our side did a very good job elaborating why the incentive for the like nations that are already there, like incentive of like, you know, like solving terrorism or solving like climate change that is already there, will increase to like 1 or 2%. There was a very like perfect analysis on why that will increase. However, ladies and gentlemen, what we note that the cortex of this debate, the apex of this debate, lies upon what is a good education and who benefits the domestic nation as a whole. Like, do countries want to step in because that actually does a benefit to their own country? So we're going to prove to you in my speech that it actually does, right? So why is that so? And that leads on to our first clash. Why, like, what is the purpose of education? Who provides better education? They talked about the school's role of, like, you know, morality, how school's role is to protect the national benefit. First of all, they're so worried, the both team of the opposing team was so worried that their national, like, you know, politicians would start to, like, sacrifice all their, like, domestic kind of benefits. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, that would not happen if you look at US, as you said, Donald Trump, EU nations, like, trying to deviate from European nations just because of their benefits. We see a lot of the times where status quo is so focused on the counter, like, part, where they're so focused on their own benefits. So our policy is not to change that. We just want to provide the students that are affected by these politicians, affected by the media, like Fox News, that says, like, we're going to build a giant wall in Mexico because we don't want these, like, black people to come in. We're just going to prevent that. And why is that bad? No unique harms coming from their side. If they're so worried about national benefits, we're going to prove to you in my first, like, clash why we actually, like, solve that. First of all, ladies and gentlemen, when it comes to the roles of school, we believe that nurturing good citizens, like good members, successful members of our country and our nation, is also beneficial for our network and for our society, right? Like people like from Singapore, China, Japan, gathering all together, having this wonderful debate. We believe that this enables us to be like better persons, right? When it comes to globalized world, where we like interact with people from, for example, like New York, when we go to like China, because like you guys are gonna be like international leaders someday, and I believe that you guys are so talented. So we believe that basically, ladies and gentlemen, giving that opportunity in the first place, saying that, of course you have to love your countries and have pride to your countries, but just say Chinese dragons are good, but then it's not like Chinese dragons like defeat every dragons of other nations. It's not like hanbok is good, but it's not better than kimono. We're not saying that, right? So basically, ladies and gentlemen, we believe that nurturing global leaders leads to economic benefit of that country itself. Our second clash leads to why does the society benefit? First of all, ladies and gentlemen, you actually do not legitimize these people to discriminate other people from like diverse ethnicity and diverse race. Why is that so? Because you live in a very diverse like nation, or for example in the US, like 20% of Hispanics go in, like immigrants like go into like US, right? Now you legitimize them if you tell them that United States is the best country, like you guys are the best people and they're all inferior and you have to like love your country comes first. We actually like deter those kind of like xenophobic and like those kind of like sentiment in the first place, which is beneficial. Why is that so? In a political context, if you look at Korea, for example, we have a lot of like anti-sentiment towards Japan, although I love you guys, right? And Japan also has anti-sentiment to Korea. And this deters countries from making like peaceful negotiations, which leads to like economic benefits for that country as a whole. And our last clash, ladies and gentlemen, about national interest, like national education, we want to note that the fact is we're not like actually brainwashing these students that you have to like give up your national benefit. You have to like give up your housing for that refugee over there. We're not saying that, right? We just want to say that every culture matters, every person matters. Of course, your country is very good and you have to love your country, but also other nations as well. We're not forcing individuals to do something. We're not forcing a policy at the end of the day.
So ladies and gentlemen, basically, we told you guys the unique benefits that we had, right? We talked about political context, how this will now anti-sentiments toward other countries that deter peaceful negotiations which bring out economic benefit will not happen. We talked about diverse immigrants as being welcomed and respected. So at the end of the day, ladies and gentlemen, so proud to propose. Thank you.
Okay, that was the last speaker from the government bench, the government whip, arguing for the motion. Let's count the number of green lights. I'm seeing a lot of green lights have been switched on. The count is 43. That puts a total for the closing government at 78 out of 100. Now, time already for the last speaker of today's debate, the opposition whip.
In this debate, we should debate whether government can make priority of specified principle or not. As we told you, we cannot say global citizen is always superior to nationalisms, because thinking of the benefit of own country is also essential to keep profit of own countries. So schools should provide various knowledge of various aspects so that students can have proper choice with a lot of options. So education should make priority of students' good future with choices. Education should not be used for solving these problems. Okay, let me move on our arguments. We have two arguments. First is what is school and what education should be. And second argument is why government should not intervene this choice, which citizens think globalism or nationalism. I'll explain one by one. First, what is school or what education should be? I think that school role is teaching subject or teaching social skills that is useful for their futures. Sorry, nothing else. And also, in the present situations, in order to get great record, students have to follow teachers. So what teachers say is all for their students. That is why various kinds of idea, not specified idea, is necessary. Because if we specify some principal idea is the most important thing, students have to follow this. I think it is very strange. So students are not slave of teachers. That is why, yes, please.
If the current society is incapable of providing the students with a particular view, why can't education be the way to do that?
So as we told you in the presentation, we can run out of a lot of aspects. As we told you, our first speaker clearly told you that we can run about history of own countries and world history, right? That is why this situation is very good, because we can have a lot of aspects. And moreover, schools should not jump into the conclusion of answer in controversial issues. For example, killing person is always bad. So we can teach students that we should not kill persons. However, what politician is the best is one of the controversial issues. So teacher must not decide who is the best when we have the election. That is why whether globalism is better than nationalism or not is unclear or controversial issues according to our opening speaker. That is why, because both idea is necessary, so schools should not make priority of this specified principle. So in conclusion, school cannot force students to be this global citizen because it is very strange.
Point of information, sir.
Sorry, nothing else. Okay, let me move on our second argument. Second argument is why government should not intervene this choice. Citizens think whether citizens think globalism or nationalism. Because we should depend on individuals, because we have the freedom of choices. Because we can decide what religion they believe or what principles they think. And we have freedom of expression, right? So with the same reasons, we should not decide what kind of person should students become, because students should decide which is the best based on the knowledge they can get. So various kind of knowledge aspect is necessary. And thinking about their own country is also essential.
Point of information, sir.
Sorry, no thank you. However, with this motion, we lose a lot of freedom of choices. For example, we lose the freedom of choices of what they run. For example, if we want to search history of the country in the futures, learning about own countries is essential. However, if we prioritize of global citizens, we cannot learn about own history at all. And also, we lose our freedom of choice in thought, because government forced to have some same idea of globalism, right?
Sir.
Sorry, no thank you. So this losing freedom of choice is very serious. Even if global citizen is needed, that cannot be reasons why we can force students to be global citizens. Because government should not take people's interest in nationalism forcibly. That is why education is not a suitable way to solve these problems. Because we cannot decide student destiny or student future, because we have to provide student choices, and students make these choices, right? So I think that providing choices is an education role. It is so I think that intervene their choices is not role of education. So in conclusion, even if the purpose is public welfare, solving refugee problem and so on, however, we cannot decide or thought of citizens. If we want to make globalization, or if we want to make global citizens, education is not way. Education is not waste. As we told you, politicians should promote this global idea without education. So we should make priority of education role. We strongly oppose this motion. Thank you for listening.
Okay, that was the opposition whip arguing against the motion. Let's count the number of green lights switched on for the last speaker. 21 out of 50, putting the total for the closing opposition at 41 out of 100. Okay, all 8 speakers have presented their case for and against the motion. While our adjudicators are making their decision, let's get some audience feedback. Audience judges, if you agree with the government bench, if you agree with today's motion, please turn your lights on. If you agree with the opposition bench, if you disagree with today's motion, please leave it off. On the count of 3, please make your decision. 1, 2, 3. I'm seeing almost all the lights have been switched on. 45 for and 5 against. So it looks like that the vast majority of our audience judges are in agreement with the government bench. Let's hear from our adjudicators. Professor Joshua Park.
So I'll be talking about closing government. So I do feel that you do make a clear effort at providing an extension that distinguishes you from opening government, and you try to tie in the aspect of education and try to picture yourselves as being more engaged with the motion in that way. So I think that's probably a pretty good strategy in terms of trying to differentiate yourselves between them. That said, I don't think opening government doesn't necessarily have any mechanisms of reaching their broader end goals. Perhaps it's just the difference between at what point are you placing the kind of the midpoint. I do feel that while you're closer to the individual level, I think it would have been better if you could explain why this is more tied in with the motion as opposed to the midpoint that they're bringing.
I'll be discussing on the closing opposition. I think it's very interesting on the ideas you brought in the debate, actually. Some of them, I think, would be better to be sent up first in the debate than just later in the whip speech example. Discussion example, the nationalist issue that were quite narrative by government side saying that they're quite negative points of view, etc. I think a bit more explanation example on those ideas could coexist example to explain with globalization, right? And why these two are a balance of education. Another point was actually why government should intervene, right? Why government should actually pick a side for the child, the kid. Why not we pick ourselves example? I think very good question.
So to sum up the back half of this debate and the debate as a whole, I think 2 new things really come out of the back half in general. The first is a deeper discussion of education, and the second is an examination of what the purpose of education is and the rights and wrongs of government intervention in this case. So turning back and taking a look at the debate as a whole, the question we really have is, 1, the vision question, who sells us best on their perception of how the world ought be, and then 2, is this the right means for achieving that vision, both in terms of its efficacy, but also in terms of what the role of education ought really be. So when we looked at the different teams in this debate, what we were really looking for in deciding a winner was teams that engaged with both aspects of that crucial question.
Thank you for your insight. Now it's time for me to finally announce the results. The grand winner of the 2017 Asian Cup is Team Korea. Congratulations. How do you guys feel?
Oh, we're very happy to be here and to win this, but at the same time, we also enjoyed this debate very much, and we felt that the entire experience of not just this debate, but all the debates that we had so far in the tournament were very great.
Gina, you look really nervous during the adjudicators speech.
Yeah, like I was nervous because like everybody was so good, but and like thank you all for coming, and I hope you guys enjoy the rest of Korea. Like it's a very good place.
All right, congratulations. All right, that's all the time we have for today. The winning team of the 2017 Asian Cup has been announced, which means that Intelligence High School debate has also come to an end. I hope you enjoyed the journey as much as I did. And for the very last time, thank you for tuning in and goodbye.